Good evening. Got a lot going on this evening, so let's get started. Welcome to the November 2017 General Services Committee meeting. At this time, are there any additions, corrections, deletions to the minutes? Hearing none, I'll send them forward. Privilege of the floor. Sarah doesn't want to say anything, so we're going to keep going. So tonight, we're going to, before our agenda items, we are going to have a presentation on the ad hoc committee's report regarding solid waste and recycling at the transfer facility. I know on the outside it looked like it would probably be a pretty easy task, but I think everybody's finding out it's a lot more complicated issue than just simply flipping switches. So I'd like to, at this time, Al Drake has done a really good job of trying to herd cats and keep order and keep the conversation going forward. And I really appreciate your efforts, Al. I was at a lot of the meetings, and your dedication to this topic was there and appreciated. So would you like to say a few words about the project?
Well, I just want to say that we're definitely looking at another study. I'll let people read it before we really get any questions or in depth. But we do need to have another study to look at another aspect of our recycling, as mentioned in our report. Have another set of eyes look into the, purchasing a MRF and actually get into the business if we decide to go that route. And I know that three things that probably are going to make our decision is going to be money, how much it's going to cost us. Secondly, I'm pretty sure that another part of the decision would be what is the future for recycling. And I know that our concern for the environment is also the third factor that's going to enter into our decision making. And that's about all I really want to say, because I think you're going to have to read the report to really have some questions about it. It's pretty extensive. Thank you.
Thanks again, Al, for your dedication to that project. It was well worth the exercise also, and identified not only just that topic but other issues that we would need to address at the facility. So at this time, our esteemed administrator, Mr. Hagman, would like to give us a PowerPoint presentation on the project. Take it away.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much. And as Al's already indicated, this is really going to be the beginning of a continuing exercise. What's been taking place already is important. If you will, the road was extremely wide. It is now narrowing down. We've eliminated, through a lot of research, a variety of things that initially we thought might qualify moving forward, but knowing the options that now do exist, there are fewer of those options. They're important options, but there's a lot of money associated with those options. There's a lot of risk associated with those options. It doesn't mean it's bad. It just means that it's going to take additional homework, which is what we're going to recommend. But today, all I want to do, in advance of everybody and the reports are on your desk, in advance of everybody really delving into it in detail, kind of give an overview, 30,000-foot level comment or 3 or 4, and then the homework can begin. The report isn't coming to you with all the answers, but it certainly has narrowed the field. And to that extent, Phil already indicated too. Something that seems very simple on the surface is very complex, and quickly the committee learned that there's a lot of interrelationships that take place that you don't necessarily realize on the surface. So we're identifying definite steps to take moving forward, but we're not to the final point of making the final decision, and that's going to take some time. There are a number of challenges that we will be facing, but many of those are caused by factors beyond our day-to-day control, and not all of them are negative factors either. It's just that the bottom line is changes are going to have to be made, and if they are, we want to be prepared to do it in a proper fashion. So again, this is the evaluation of the county solid waste recycling transfer facility. It is an all-encompassing review. It is not a review of one particular step one way or the other. And let's see here. We had some technical difficulties earlier today, so we're going to work with them a little bit. I'm going to give a little bit of a historical perspective, some of which you may know, some of which you may not know, but I think in terms of looking at what's happened, there's kind of 4 different time periods. First of all, and most importantly, we go back to 1991. None of us were around at that time, but some important decisions were made. A landfill was established, state-of-the-art, but there was also a need to get some of the materials, particularly at that point solid waste materials, to the landfill because they were dealing with a certain size component in terms of the type of vehicles that could be utilized at that location. So the county stepped forward, parcel with, if you will, indirect partnership with DAG, and developed a transfer station that was incorporating both solid waste and recyclable material. Key at that time, though, aside from the construction, was a conscious decision made by the board, which was to establish this program as a self-serving program through a fee-based system, not having to rely on the general fund and the county's general fund, in that if it was going to survive, it was going to be through an enterprise operation. Very important decision, and the right kind of decision to state, because if it does revert back to the general fund, that means it reverts back to all of us in terms of property tax payments, because that's where the funding would come from. So that conscious public policy decision made on the front end, and essentially for all the years, there are some exceptions we know of now, but essentially since then, that's the way it has stayed. So that's what got started in 1991. Then we're going to have to do it this way, I guess. Okay. Then a period of time, roughly, between 1991 and 2010, the program ran pretty smoothly. There wasn't a reliance on general fund. There were sufficient fees that were coming in. Fees are coming by way of solid waste as well as recycling. On average, that means that there's some other highs and lows, but we're looking at about 31,000 tons per year average of solid waste material and about 5,000 tons per year average recycling. With that tonnage, of course, comes the fees. And in essence, the fees were there balancing things out. Revenues derived from both, though, were required to come together in order to cover the expense of the operation. General numbers, you're looking at in the neighborhood of $2 million in solid waste fees and $400,000 or $500,000 in revenue from the sale of our product, which was recyclable materials. But it was the combination of the two that kept everything afloat. Also, in that time period, there was a reserve fund that was established because there might have been a year or two where we fell $25,000 to the red, and there was a reserve there to balance that out. We didn't call on general funds. The reverse, though, is if some money were to be made beyond what the expenses of the year were, it went right into that reserve account. It did not go to general fund. Again, it's an enterprise fund. It stands on its own. The other purpose that was utilized for the reserve fund was when the fund built up a little bit, it's perhaps use it as a local match on the purchase of equipment. A lot of the equipment out there is very expensive stuff, and it has to be replaced every so often, and that became a mechanism. And through the time period of 1991 to 2010, life was good. Now we get into a more current time period, 2010-ish to essentially now, 2016. There were a variety of external influences that started to impact the day-to-day operation. First, and again, it's not necessarily all bad, but they were being impacted. First, there was the New York State DEC guidelines now being imposed on landfills, the objective being to minimize what's going in the landfill. That's a good thing. There's nothing wrong about that, but it also means, in terms of our operation, tonnage levels started to go down, which is a revenue source. Physical plant changes were required. This one kind of caught us off guard, but DEC, again, came in our case and said, you've got to construct a new facility to handle some of the materials so they're inside when they're dumped, not external, because they're blown all over the place. And literally, there was a citation, and we had a period of time to respond. We did in that time period, but that was $1.5 million in terms of a capital cost. that wasn't in the reserve account. So again, not necessarily a terrible thing, but it was another piece of the puzzle in that time period that we began addressing. Thirdly, there was a greater emphasis actually placed on recyclable materials, which means we're pulling them out of the waste stream. Again, that's all positive in the big picture, but it has an impact on what's going on at our landfill. Another factor became the recycling market itself, which for several years it was grand because the value of the material that we are collecting as an asset and then selling was growing dramatically because the international market was growing dramatically. And then life changed, and it went the opposite way. The advantage we do have still is that our materials, because it's a more pure material, is of more value than materials that go through a MRF. It doesn't mean that MRF is a bad thing. It just means that the market is a little bit different. So we're a little bit ahead on the market even when it's in a down cycle, but nonetheless, it became volatile and up and down, and that was having an impact on the operation. We talked about before, somewhat minor, but still important. We went after several grants on the recycling side, 50-50 matches with the state of New York. It's now 7 years later, and we're $350,000 in the red, so to speak, because that match has yet to be paid. It's not a problem just for Jefferson County, it's across the board. That's something that is last on the totem pole or priority list, and so that's also had some impact on our operation. And also we should acknowledge now that because there is the popularity growing of the single stream approach, some of our municipalities and neighbors are moving in that direction. Again, that's not to comment that it's a bad thing, it simply acknowledges that the impact of tonnage starts to go down. So, we're now into 2016. There's been a couple years where we've been in the red with our operation, and our board chairman wisely says we need to take a serious look at what's going on for the future. We need to examine what's happening and take a look at where we want to position ourselves for the future operation of the transfer facility. And with that, a committee was appointed, given the charge of examining across the board everything going on, and as a result, you now have a report in front of you. Move forward to now, you have that report, and it goes in great depth, which I'm not going to deal with today. We want you to take a look at it, but it starts to explain and trace to the statistics what's been going on, why, and how. I think you all know, but just as a point of reference, as Al's indicated, he's the chairman of that group. Dan McBride, Bob Ferris, Bill Johnson has been involved with it, and Phil, as the oversight chair, has been engaged on occasion as well. Staff-wise, sitting around the table has been Joe Gould, who is the man in charge of the program out there on the site, Jim Lawrence, who technically has the oversight as the highway superintendent, myself, and a couple other folks on occasion. But now that we're in November 2017, what we want to stress is this is the beginning of the process. So we're going to take the time collectively to analyze everything and bring it back likely February of next year to really get into the particular steps and go from there. Okay, in terms of findings, we're going to talk about findings and recommendations. There are several that we want to acknowledge because it has been a long period of time that we've been engaged in this exercise. There are going to be 6 specifically, but we'll deal with them one at a time. It's just important to recognize that these, again, are the big picture items that you need to be aware of as you look at all the detailed information. First, both solid waste and recycling industries are very complex and primarily private sector driven. It doesn't mean universally, but primarily private sector driven and, again, very, very complex. In our particular case, kind of indicated already, there is a close relationship between solid waste and recycling at that facility. It's set up to handle both. It does it quite efficiently, but in point of fact, what we need to recognize is we can't have one without the other. It's a tag team effort at the moment in order to balance the budget. Another point worthy of note with the transfer facility, we have had some recent blips, but overall, if you go back to 1991 to now, it's run very, very efficiently. We have very few staff, and they do a very capable job. The drop-off that we've seen in the past couple of years seems to now be leveling off. We're not going to be at the 31,000 tons a year level. We are probably going to be closer to 28,000 tons. Again, there'll be some ups and downs. Recycling recently has actually gone up in terms of volume, in terms of tonnage, and likely, as we're looking at the data right now for 2017, will still stay a little bit higher. That said, it's not anticipated that's going to last forever. It will likely get back down to more along the lines of 5,000 tons per year. That said, I want to make it very clear, what the tonnage is and what the market is per ton, two different factors entirely. So you can't assume if the tonnage goes up a measurable amount, automatically the revenue goes up. It's a function of what's going on in the marketplace. The other point worthy of note, we continue to avoid a major cost for the program that we have in place in terms of recycling because it's a source separation process and we all do it. Any other system that we start to look at, somebody's going to have to pay for taking care of that piece of the total picture. But right now, because that is done locally, the majority of folks do source separation. Aside from merits of one versus the other, my point is that there's a significant cost savings because any other system is going to cost us more. Another point worthy of note with single stream recycling, as I said, it costs money, and as the committee went through its due diligence, we quickly determined, after looking at several models, we've done that homework. We talk about dual stream approach to recycling. We talk about the single stream, but actually transporting it to another location, which in our case would be Syracuse. They became cost prohibitive. That's just not in the ballpark in order to be able to, at the very least, break even. That data is in the report, so you'll see that. When we talk about the single stream that's going to municipal recycling facility, a MRF, that can happen here, but the level of tonnage, again, at the moment, appears to be greater than what we're currently bringing in at that 5,000 mark. But in terms of options to seriously consider, that is a viable option. That clearly is a viable option. And that's what we discovered, somewhat to our surprise, but that's what we discovered. The last item of note, as you can see, we need to keep a positive attitude towards some of these other changes that are occurring because they are positive. It's not a bad thing that all of a sudden there's more reuse and recycling going on instead of having clothes going into the landfill, or in terms of the plastics and the glass and all that sort of stuff. That's positive. It preserves the landfill for a much longer period of time. We want to be a part of that as well. But again, ultimately, that might end up impacting the tonnage a bit, and that's where there's a revenue stream that we need to be sensitive to one way or the other. In terms of recommendations, and unlike a budget presentation, we're almost done. We're not going to be going on much longer. But in terms of recommendations, there are 3 qualifiers that are important before we talk about 6 recommendations. First, already indicated, since 1991, it has been a self-funded program, and that was a decision based by the public policymakers then. Anything that we're recommending now keeps that priority in mind. We are not talking about wanting to incur additional costs on a regular basis for our fund balance. We are also not suggesting that as we look to the future for what other options are available, we cover it by an exorbitant amount of tipping fees as well. In both cases, it filters back to the taxpayer, and it doesn't make sense. User fee makes sense, but when you triple or quadruple the fee in order to provide a service, that becomes a question mark. So for the recommendations the committee's made, we are suggesting that we want to maintain that principle. Another priority, and again, looking at what's happened most recently, there were a number of financial guffaws in small sense compared to the overall operation that needed to be addressed, and the committee looked at those things and came forward with 6 specific recommendations to help cure those problems. We've come a long way in a short period of time to achieve that change, and it's looking like 2017 will actually end up in a situation where expenses don't exceed costs. So we're moving in the right direction because of the decisions we've already made, but we needed to bring those things forward before we did a final report. But that also positions us well moving into the next couple of years. Solid waste recycling industry is very complex. It's very volatile, and there's a lot of risk. I can't emphasize, not necessarily a bad thing, but we need to be very cognizant of the risk that might surface as a public entity looking down the road at some of the options that could be recommended. But understanding all of that, we do need to make some recommendations. First, it's not broken, folks. What we're doing today still can survive, if you will, or still can operate in the future as we currently do. Might be some efficiencies of scale, some adjustments. So we're suggesting we continue utilizing the programs in place in a 2 to 5 year period. We're going to do some other things, and that's what we're suggesting. But in terms of moving forward, there's not a crisis state that's going on out there. We don't need to spend a whole lot of extra money to continue doing what we're doing. It's working well and can for the foreseeable future. Additionally, in terms of a MRF, we do think that can work. And that is, on a parallel plane, something to be explored. But in exploring a MRF, this is where the devil's in the details. There can be MRFs that are private sector driven, owned and operated. There can be MRFs that are public sector driven, owned and operated. There can be public-private partnerships. That's a level of assessment that this committee didn't get into. We've recognized that MRF can work, but we've got to examine different ways and how to make that the most viable option. And so that's something we'd be recommending. A third item that can also happen on a parallel path is do an assessment of our existing operation in terms of potentially privatizing that. Don't know if there's the market there or not. Philosophically, that's a whole different question if we want to do it anyway, but that's something worthy of consideration. A fourth item, again, all happening at the same time, is entering into discussions with DANK. Part of our due diligence, we've already spoken with DANK, we've spoken with a whole lot of stakeholders, but as it relates to now moving forward, have a discussion with DANK in terms of they're considering taking over the operation, or in the alternative, the operation in some fashion or another gets moved to the DANK facility. That becomes a viable option as well. And again, a little background in that case. What's happening now is that we have a very good operation. We're serving professional haulers that are serving the residents of the county. Our culture, our environment is different than the other 2 counties that are part of the regional DANK operation. And it always has been, and it probably always will be. But what that means is we're serving smaller haulers. DANK has a limit on the type of equipment that's going to go to DANK. That doesn't mean it's bad. It means there's a direct haul and there's a one-time cost. In the case of the smaller haulers, really the material is being handled twice. It comes to our facility, okay, we handle it, take care of it, package it up, and now we take it to DANK in a bigger trailer. So it's being handled twice. There's an expense associated with it. Perhaps, and again, no thorough discussion has taken place yet, but perhaps it makes sense to look at just going directly to DANK. That's a whole other staging area set up, so that's something to be evaluated, but perhaps that's something that might make some sense. Now, to accomplish all that, we are suggesting that we now put together a 2-tiered approach. One, that whenever the opportunity is right, or when we think we specifically want to move forward, is appoint a new ad hoc committee to oversee items 2, 3, and 4. And to some extent, keep an eye on number 1. But so doing, it's also recognized that we're now in a level of expertise that's going to be required to do that thorough, in-depth research. And it needs to be somebody or somebodies that are stakeholders in the business. that deal with MRFs, that deal with transfer stations, that deal with solid waste, that deal with recycling. I don't know if there's a single person, I don't know if it's a company, a firm, but the point being, somebody that's in the business, understands the business, understands the relationships that take place, and also knows the questions to ask. To the extent that we've asked questions and done our homework, I think we have a very positive response from folks, but I don't know that we're asking all the questions. And a simple example that if we get involved with the building of a municipal recycling facility, now we're in the competitive game of pricing. And what's our rate per ton going to be tomorrow if our competitors who are already in existence in the private sector, in Rome, in Syracuse, and other places, cut their fees in half, so the customers we have coming our way now say, oh, I can save some money and I'm going to go further south. Nothing wrong with that. That's competition, folks. But how quickly can we react? And how quickly should we react? Well, if it's a private business, I make that decision today and it's implemented tomorrow. If it's, for the most part, public sector in our world, it's a 30-day turnaround, and that's doing good. That doesn't mean we do things badly, but there's an accountability factor, openness factor that we have to go through a process. Well, now we've lost 30 days of customers going elsewhere. Doesn't mean it can't be addressed. It simply means the complexities, the private sector versus the public sector, makes it more challenging. And we just need to be aware of it. So open our eyes, and if we're going to go in that direction, be well aware of it in advance. Additionally, when we're talking about a MRF, another factor that comes to play, right now we can substantiate that at 5,000 tons, which is going into our facility, a MRF, it's out of the ballpark. We can't afford it. We simply can't. When we get to 10,000 or beyond, there's a reasonableness to it. But again, there's no guarantees on that. But again, at that point, well, okay, 5,000, what you'll see in the report, there's another 3,000 already goes outside of the county that we don't collect at the transfer station. We're now at 8,000. What that means is that we have to put some sort of deal together with somebody outside of the county to want to come to the county. Doesn't mean it can't happen, but the maximum, and again, we've got that in the report, for the tri-county areas is 20,000 tons. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever tons have got to come from a St. Lawrence or a Lewis County. Doesn't mean it can't happen, but that's a whole other exercise that has to occur, and then when it occurs, it has to be long-term. We can't be in a situation where somebody can pull out tomorrow. Again, because bottom line, at the end of the day, if there's going to be a downside, if we don't have a strong reserve in place, it's going to fall back on the general fund and the property tax payers. So, don't want to overemphasize, but those are the kind of issues that are going to be required, and therefore we need to have somebody that we have confidence in that can provide that information to us, can give us that assessment, so when it's time for 15 people to make a decision, you're comfortable with the decision being made. We also need to think about next steps, and the next step in terms of a recommendation of our group is to absorb what you're going to read over the next couple of weeks. It took 18 months to get it to you. We don't expect in a night you're going to make a decision. Target perhaps through committee next February. In January, we can add an entire year of data for what the experience was for 2017, both with recycling and with solid waste. I don't know that it changes things in a dramatic way, but at least we'll have current data, and it will go back all the way to 2010. Making decisions will be something that will be helpful to us. So those are the 6 suggestions moving forward in a big perspective. Now it's up to you all to look through 13, 15, 20 pages of stuff and start networking with fellow board members, myself, Al, in particular. If you got questions, we'll answer them, because you probably will, and we hope you do. Again, the exercise, I think, has been very positive. It's proven a lot of things that we thought might be feasible, not feasible. It's proven that some things that might not necessarily be feasible are indeed feasible. But at the end of the day, we need to make sure that what we're going to do for the long term, once that decision is made, we're there. And for the immediate future, what is existing is working, and there's no reason to turn the lights out overnight. Again, long term, we may do other things, but in the short term, you've got some time to make a decision. But recognizing big picture market, where everything's going, we do need to look to the future, and we need to have some sense of what is the best plan for residents of Jefferson County. So, not talking about details, you've got them in front of you, but suggest that for the next 45 days we kind of work through stuff and we bring it back in a work session in front of the environment for general services and then see where you want to go. That's it. Any initial questions that I can pass on to Al? If not, again, this is simply an overview to give you a sense of the big picture, and then you'll drill down with the report itself. Okay?
Again, I'd like to thank Al Drake, Dan McBride, and Bobby Ferris for taking their time with this exercise. It was quite informing. They went on field trips, lots of good discussion. So thank you very much for your time and efforts. It's greatly appreciated. Yeah. With this one programming note, with one of the changes that was made out there is that some commodities were being held on to in the hopes that if they could stay outside, like scrap metal and things, was being held on to see if the markets would move. That's not a practice anymore. The material gets moved on a regular basis. So the 2016 numbers, you'll see a little uptick. But that was the new policy going forward, that you really can't bank on the markets, and we need the revenue when we can get the revenue. So, but other than that, it's a very detailed report. I want to thank Mr. Hageman for all the efforts he put into it too. So, thank you. Let's do some resolutions.
First resolution this evening, authorizing agreement in relation to the Ignition Interlock Device Monitoring Program funding.
May I have a motion? Mr. Ferris? Mr. Doldo? Discussion? Mr. Maxson?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The grant, is that just for us to pay for our oversight of the program, or does that underwrite the astronomical cost of this to the people?
Well, we have our expert in hand, but I believe essentially it's covering our expenses. But, yeah.
They reduced our grant?
Yes.
Okay.
Done? Hey, I hear you.
What I don't like about the program is that it's crony capitalism, that the state has certain, we require people to buy and have these things installed by, is this something you guys do over here? So crony capitalism, I oppose crony capitalism. I don't want to turn down grant money because it's expensive for us to oversee the program, but the whole program I have a problem with fundamentally.
I can understand that. Mr. Ferris?
I am not a crony to any of these capitalists. And I can tell you that there's probably 5 to 6 people every day coming into our store for recalibrations. There are quite a few of these units out, and we just turned down another company to ask us to do them, because nobody ever comes in and says, I love this, thank you very much for doing this. They're all miserable people.
Thank you for...
No crony capitalism.
Okay. Any further discussion? All in favor, aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Next resolution is authorizing agreement with Jefferson County Children's Home for the provision of non-secure detention services.
May I have a motion, please? Mr. Nabawanic, Mr. Maxon, discussion? All in favor, aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Authorizing agreement with a whole lot of people, including Knudsen and Associates, not sure how to pronounce that one name, for provision of psychological testing, evaluation, and recommendations for treatment of JDs, PINs, and out-of-risk home placement of adult sexual offenders.
May I have a motion, please? Mr. Goldo. Ms. Zadsit. Discussion? All in favor, aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Authorizing agreement with the New York State Division of Criminal Justice Services in relation to aid to prosecution program.
May I have a motion, please? Mr. Nabawanic. Second. Mr. Ferris. Discussion? All in favor, aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Authorizing the implementation and funding in the first instance 100% of the Federal Aid State Bridge New York program, aid eligible costs of a transportation federal aid project, appropriating funds therefore, and amending the 2017 county budget and capital plan, and this is for County Road 75 on Mill Creek.
May I have a motion, please? Mr. Doldo. Mr. Maxon. Discussion? All in favor, aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Amending the 2017 county budget in relation to the road machinery fund.
May I have a motion, please? Ms. Zadsit, Mr. Nabawanic. Discussion? All in favor, aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Authorizing agreement with the New York State Division of Criminal Justice Services in relation to age and offense program.
May I have a motion, please? Mr. Ferris, Mr. Doldo. Discussion? All in favor, aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Authorizing agreement with the New York State Office of Indigent Legal Services.
May I have a motion, please? Mr. Ferris, Mr. Maxon. Discussion? All in favor, aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Authorizing agreement with the New York State Office of Indigent Legal Services.
May I have a motion, please? Mr. Doldo, Mr. Ferris. Discussion? All in favor, aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Approving the STOP DWI plan for 2018.
May I have a motion, please? Mr. Ferris. Anybody else? Mr. Doldo. Discussion? All in favor, aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Reauthorizing agreement with Jefferson County Stormwater Municipal Coalition.
May I have a motion, please? Mr. Nabawanic. Mr. Doldo. Discussion? All in favor, aye. Opposed? Motion carries. In your packet, you have a planning report and weights and measures report. I want to thank the department heads for coming up tonight. Thank you very much for representing General Services, and I do want to thank probation. Recently, you've heard about the uptick in attendance at the county jail. Probation, I like to point out from time to time, relieves a tremendous amount of taxpayer dollars as far as alternatives to incarceration, and those efforts aren't always in the headlines, but it's greatly appreciated. Thank you, and thank everybody else. Does anybody have anything for any of the department heads? I do want to thank, this is our last session of the year, right?
Oh, yes, it is.
Of this
Yes.
term. This committee spends a lot of money, a lot of taxpayer dollars, and I appreciate the committee's due diligence in making decisions, and some of them aren't easy. And I think this group has always approached it with care, with the taxpayer in mind. I know they appreciate it, and I appreciate the effort. So, radio project is in full swing, and we're writing a lot of checks for that lately. But it's for the good of the community. It is a life and death topic. So, And on another note, we have some good airport news. I'll let the county administrator make that announcement.
We're handing out the most recent month, and what you would see for the month of October is, again, we're up measurably, 40% over last year at the same time, which also means in terms of our customer base, our passengers being served, we're at 5,000, in excess of 5,000. Again, those are monumental numbers for us. And it stays very busy out there. Hopefully starting next week, but fairly soon, as long as we can stay ahead of the curve with Mother Nature, there'll be an expansion of the parking lot, so to accommodate all the activity, and to the snow that eventually has to be pushed somewhere, so there's going to be measurable increase that's going to be done by the highway department.
Jim, you want to say a few words? Okay. I think it's going to be like 20 more parking spaces. We did just host the 2020 event out at the hangar. Continue to get a lot of good comments about that facility. The FBO facility is just an impressive asset to the community. But it was great to see. I went out there and saw lots of traffic, lots of kids pushing their resumes around.
Yep.
So, and also our esteemed airport director just won an award, didn't he? Manager of the Year or something.
Professional of the Year, but it's through the statewide engineering association. I'm drawing a blank when it is at the moment, but was sponsored through Bernier Carr, who was nominated by Bernier Carr. And they headed to a meeting in Canastota, I believe, for the award banquet last Thursday, and there were, as I understood, 3 or 4 different mayors or local municipalities that were also receiving awards for probably a whole lot of capital infrastructure stuff, sewer lines, water lines, and so sounds pretty positive for activity going on in Jefferson County.
Great. One other mention on the airport statistics. I don't think that we've hit 38,000 since we've taken ownership of it, have we?
Yeah, we have.
We have.
We've been to 39,000.
39. So we've got 2 more months of numbers. I'm
correct.
Sure we're going to surpass that amount. So it still continues to be good news out there. So appreciate everybody's effort. Anything else to come before the committee? Motion to adjourn. Mr. Doldo, Mr. Maxson. Thank you. Okay, Bob.
Have a good Thanksgiving.
You too. Have a happy Thanksgiving. Thanks for the nice job.